There we go.
Okay, so now we're going.
Right.
Good afternoon. We're going to spend a little time this afternoon talking about your role and responsibility as a board member of a community action agency. Now, the material that we're covering is available to you in printed form on an instructional memo, and Carol May has copies of those if you would like to have them, or we can email them to you. The first thing that we need to talk about is you're responsible for assessing and responding to the causes and conditions of poverty in your community. And that really goes at the reason why most of you were selected for membership on the board, because you are known in your community to having some intimate knowledge about the causes and the conditions of poverty. What happens because people are poor in your community? You're also responsible for then planning outcomes or results of the services that you develop to provide services for these low-income individuals in your communities. And the third thing you're responsible for is to ensure that your agency is fiscally and administratively responsible, or you are operating in a sound manner so far as the management of your agency is concerned and the fiscal activity of your agency. And we've seen a lot of evidence to the contrary in the recent history in our news, not for community action agencies, but from other sources. And that's a big part of your responsibility. Now, the law requires that the board be made up of 3 different groups of individuals. You're called, in fact, you're referred to as a tripartite board. The first group, the 1/3 of the board members, should be representatives from a low-income community. And most agencies do that by working with organizations that serve people with low incomes, and that group then will make a selection in a demographic manner. For example, recently one organization who was helping make that selection served adults with disabilities, and the clients of the agency itself decided they wanted to pick the person who represented them, and they did an excellent job. When we asked, why did you pick this particular person, they said, she likes us. She comes to visit us. Pretty good reason. The second group, and a number of you will recognize yourselves, are either elected officials or someone selected by an elected official. And the reason for that group, I think, is that you already know how things work in your community, how to get things done, and that's the kind of person you want serving on the board. The last group, the last third of the board, is made up of people coming from a variety of groups in your community. It could be faith-based groups, it could be educational groups, could be business groups, could be governmental, it could be law enforcement. But the last third are made up of groups from people from those organizations. The question comes up every once in a while about term limits. There are no term limits prescribed in the federal guidelines. Department of Commerce sometimes will put pressure on organizations to impose term limits, in order to be sure that the board stays vibrant and functional, but that's not a requirement. It will come up from periodically. What you do want on the board are people who are knowledgeable about the communities that they represent, knowledgeable about the need, knowledgeable about the resources that are already available in that community, and of resources that the agency lacks. For example, if one of the needs that you've identified in your communities is a need for treatment for people with opioid addiction, and you recognize that in your communities, the closest treatment facility is 200 or 300 miles away. Obviously, this is an area of need. Now, then you have to decide whether or not you're going to provide that service, try to provide that service directly in some manner, or simply form a relationship with another organization that can indeed provide that kind of service for your community. Now, as board members, you're already aware of the fact that you're responsible for the governance, not the actual day-by-day operation. You take responsibility for that by hiring a competent executive director, and in CARD you certainly have somebody who's both experienced and competent to provide that kind of guidance for your agency. Now, you do participate in periodic needs assessments, and we've talked about that already in board meetings this year. That must be done every 3 years, and Melinda Brown on your staff will be directing that needs assessment effort, and you have some critical parts that you need to play in that completion of that report. And she will work with you as you work through the various steps in completing a needs assessment. It will give you a current picture of where the needs lie in your organization, in your communities. Another responsibility you have is to review your agency's mission periodically to be sure that it currently reflects the needs in your organization, in your community, and if you think it needs revision, you are authorized to make any needed revisions. But that's every 5 years that you will be looking at the needs in your community, the resources that you have, and the opportunities that you have in order to address those needs in a meaningful way. You're also responsible for planning for your organization, for the annual community action plan, and for the 5-year strategic plan. Now, let's be sure that we differentiate between a strategic plan and a long-range plan. When we talk about a long-range plan, we're actually looking at just extrapolating what we're doing right now and just extending it out for 5 years, 10 years, whatever period of time. That's not the same as a strategic plan. In a strategic plan, we're looking at our vision and our values. What do we need to do as an organization in the coming 5 years to be all we can be? And your creative input in that process is essential to having a true strategic plan. You need to be involved in developing that plan, and also you're responsible by federal guidelines for reviewing how it's coming periodically, at least annually. And I know that in CARD you get a much more frequent opportunity to look at progress on any of the plans. And you primarily, maybe this will help itemize what your responsibilities are and how you meet those responsibilities. One is by regular attendance at the board meetings. Now that we're able to attend in person, that sometimes is not as convenient as we might like, but hopefully you will see that as one way of carrying out your duty and your role and your responsibility. You also need to be familiar with the core agency information. What do your bylaws say? What are your sources of funding? What are the goals that you've established as an organization? What are the applicable federal and state laws? And part of the training that we provide for you will cover just these items. Every time prior to a board meeting, you receive a detailed board packet. Part of your responsibility is to read and familiarize yourself with the information in that board packet. Somebody spent a lot of time putting it together and they want you to read it, so please do so. You are also responsible for making decisions based on the information that you receive. And that's another critical way that you carry out your role and your responsibility. You are also obligated to ensure proper fiscal and legal controls be in place. And you do that via establishing appropriate policy. And you have the assistance of experienced staff, and you have the option of calling in any kind of legal assistance that you're going to need for that purpose. The reports that you get at every board meeting provide knowledge of all the major actions of the agency. Some of those reports are given in writing, some are given in verbally, but those provide knowledge of what's happening in CARD. You're responsible for an oversight of program implementation. You make plans for the agency with the staff, but then it's the staff's responsibility to implement those program plans. Your job is oversight of that implementation. You also have major responsibility for fiscal control. Somebody else does the actual daily work, but it's your responsibility to understand what's happening so that you can take any action that's needed. Thank you. You're responsible for oversight of program evaluation, and you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end of the year, because you will look at the annual report that the agency prepares for you and supplies to ODOC. The agency provides training for you, and you have the option of asking for additional training that you need. Incidentally, if you do want a certificate for your training, we'll be happy to supply one, and we'll put a gold star on it. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.